the weather. So if I start coughing in the middle, I'm going to try to mute it as best I can. Please just stick with me on this. But we are going to go ahead and get started here. And what I am here to talk to you guys about is managing big projects with busy minds. And initially, I was going to specifically go down the whole professional route, but I feel like when you have a brain that works differently, you kind of want to balance both professional and life projects. And so I thought that we would just kind of talk about the things that I suggest to my clients that helps you stay focused on the things that you want to do without having to really sacrifice too much. So, because I always like to make sure that people know who they're listening to so that they know what to take with a grain of salt, what to take wholeheartedly. Just to introduce myself, my name is Arianna Bradford. I am an ADHD coach, have been for about 3 years. And it started out as me being a social media consultant. And then all of my clients, because they all knew that I had ADHD, started coming to me saying, you know, this social media thing is great, but I would really just like somebody to kind of help me learn how to move forward in a way that works with my brain. And I was like, oh, well, I can do that. So I changed my title to productivity coach for ADHDers. And then eventually I just became an ADHD coach. That being said, that is not all that I am. I'm always doing something. In fact, multiple somethings. I am a bit of a something collector. I don't like just doing one thing or just focusing on one thing. And I think that a lot of us can identify with that. And a lot of us are told that there's something wrong with that. And I sorely disagree. So I try to work very hard to make it so that we can balance the things that matter to us and get and do as many of those things as we can so that we feel most authentic to ourselves. I also have premenstrual dysmorphic disorder and Epstein-Barr. So I come from a very energy management-ish point of reference. I think that it's very, very important that energy is taken into account. So when I talk about these things, please know that I am not at all discounting the fact that there are going to be times where we are going to be tired or we are going to feel slow. That happens a lot. And there are ways to, you know, still usually if you use these things, you can kind of work around that. And I also have 2 children, 2 dogs, and a cat. And as most cats are, I'm fairly certain she is the devil incarnate. So I also don't have a lot of time. And so there has to be a way to work with time, to manage time. And, you know, especially, I know that not everybody here will be ADHD. I know that there are different types of neurodivergences. So I'm not going to make any assumptions, but I think that for most of us, we struggle with time management. And so this is a way that I have found that is very friendly to brains that are not neurotypical. And despite all of those things, these are the things that I have found time to still do. I wrote and self-published one book a few years ago. I'm working on a new one that I hope to query and trad publish later on this year. I'm a freelance writer for a number of larger publications. I'm running my own digital summit later on this year that's for neurodivergent brains. I work one-on-one with clients. I'm studying herbalism. I'm growing a YouTube channel. And I'm not going to pretend that I do all these things on one day, but I have been able to figure out a way to balance all of these projects in a way where I am doing things for myself and also doing things for work. So I like to also be upfront that there are things that I have working for me that I know others may not. And that would be, I am financially privileged. I'm very lucky in the fact that I grew up in the suburbs, daughter of a doctor and a teacher, and ever since then, I've really never had some of the problems that some may have. So do keep in mind, you know, that if there are things that you're like, I can't do that, totally and completely fine. I'm not saying that this is going to work for everybody 100% of the time. I am part of a couple. I know that some people may be doing this on their own. Totally and completely get that. Again, just keep that in mind. And that despite some of the issues that I have, I am mostly able-bodied. I am able, you know, my legs work, my arms work. And so, again, there may be some things that you're going to have to discount or adjust for your particular situation. So the question is, if we want to go ahead and we want to be able to do the things that work calls for, right? The big projects that work calls for, but also do these big work projects, or these big life projects rather, excuse me, that mean a lot to us, that help us kind of feel like we are focusing on things that also matter to us outside of work. How do we do that? And the answer is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And that is that we have to prioritize like a mother. We have to be able to figure out what should come first, second, third, and so forth. And the problem that we have is that a lot of the prioritization rules out there don't apply to people whose brains work a little bit differently. And there is a lot of non-visual, no, what's the word for non-visual there? Verbal suggestions and verbal expectations, but we really struggle with that. Things are usually kind of around us in a cloud, and it just kind of feels like we're punching at air a lot of the time. In fact, that's why a lot of the people I work with do very, very well at work, but struggle at keeping up with the things in personal life that they really like to. Because at work, they have guidelines, they have set deadlines, they have things that push them to get things done. Whereas when you also start trying to do things that matter to you outside of that, that can be a little bit harder because the only person you're generally answering to is yourself. So this is how we would prioritize, or how I generally suggest prioritizing, how I prioritize every day to make it so that it makes sense. And ironically, I forgot to mention that this should be visual for you, however that works, but it should be visual for you for however that works. So make that visual if you can, write it down or something. Anyway, so there are 4 things that you want to take into account anytime that you are putting together your list of projects that you're going to be focusing on when you are putting all of this together. And that's going to be practicality, energy, enthusiasm, and tasks and deadlines. 2 of those are going to have to do more with work projects, but they do have something to do with personal projects. And then 2 of them are going to be more about you personally. And it's going to take a lot of honesty to be able to answer all of these questions. So when we're talking about practicality, you want to ask yourself 4 questions. Does this need to be done? Who is relying on me to do this? Do I have everything I need to do this? And what happens if I don't get this done? To put this into an example that would work for this group, say that you are an editor and you have a manuscript that you need to look over. You ask your question, does this need to be done? Absolutely. Who is relying on you to do this? And you can definitely figure those people out, right? Do you have everything that you need to do this? And what happens if you don't get it done? Well, obviously, if you don't get it done by deadlines, that can slow up a project, right? So this is a very important project, definitely needs to be put into the I'm going to do this column. This is an important column. However, like I said, I want to make sure that you're able to balance the things that are not work, that are also important to you. So say that you've got this manuscript on the side, but you also want to, I don't know, let's say paint your house. So does this need to be done? Maybe it doesn't. Who is relying on me to do this? Well, I'm relying on me to do this, really. Do I have everything I need to do this? Maybe you do. What happens if I don't get this done? Well, your house doesn't get painted. So now it doesn't sound like it's very important and it doesn't need to be done, right? Maybe, maybe not. This is when you move on to the next step, and that is looking at the energy you have. So how much energy does this take? How much energy can I spare? And what is my cycle like if you have a cycle? What are my signs and symptoms that today is not the day? So now let's look back at, you have this manuscript thing, that was super easy, right? This is something that has to get done. But now you really want to get this house painted. These are the next questions you need to ask yourself. And you want to make sure that you're taking very close account of where you are in energy, of course, but also how much you're going to have once you are done with this project. Are you going to have enough to take care of the things that need to be taken care of now? Or should this be left off to the side and maybe we take care of it later? Maybe it's a later project. Maybe it's a project for a day when your energy is much higher and you know that you can spare the energy to do this project. So you're going to take that into account as well. And this is also very important, I want to add, for when you are doing work projects that you have to do. Sometimes people think, well, I have to do this, so I have no choice. There's no point in asking these questions. But they're very important also when it comes to how much of a project you're going to do that day and how much you're going to do centered around that project. So in the event of this manuscript, say that maybe you just are so tired and you've got to get some time in doing some editing, but you also just don't have it in you to do anything else. That is a very important distinction to make, because then what this means is, all right, I am going to go ahead and put in, I've got 30 minutes in me. 30 minutes is better than nothing. Put in those 30 minutes and then be kind to yourself. Allow yourself to do things that take less energy, less mental energy, physical energy, both, whatever you can do. Sometimes you can't do anything. Sometimes you have to go to an office or something like that. You just have no choice. And in those particular cases, I say, you know what? Try not to think about doing anything else when you get home. Try to give yourself a chance to go to sleep early if you can. Find a place to let that energy replenish, to honor the fact that you don't have a lot of energy. Because even for those of us who don't have a lot of energy regularly, we are going to have days where it's going to be better than others. And there are quite a few things that can wait. Not everything, but some things. So then we look at the enthusiasm portion. How much do I want to do this? And how do I feel when I work on this? These two I want to kind of slow down on a little bit and talk about, because I feel that we act, especially as adults, we tend to assume that enthusiasm is not important. But especially when you have a neurodivergent brain, enthusiasm plays a huge part in how much you get done and whether or not you're going to get to the task. If you hate what you're doing, you're going to find that you are going to procrastinate so much more. We all know this. But there's also the fact that if it's something that you hate doing and it's something that you have to do, when you sit down to do it, it's going to lower your mood, right? It's going to make you feel very negative about the task. And if it makes you feel very negative about the task, that is going to put you on the high-speed choo-choo train to Burnoutville. You're going to wind up being so tired of what you do so much faster than if you're able to give yourself something that makes you happy, that makes it so that you're not quite feeling like whatever it is you're doing is sucking out your soul, which takes us to how you feel when you work on something. The reason I bring this up is, if you are working on something and it is a work project, it is something that is a very big undertaking and you're hating it, one really great form of self-care that a lot of people sometimes forget about is sometimes, for us, undertaking a personal project that we really love. And I'll give you an example. I had a client who was doing a lot of work in publicity, and she hated it. She hated working on, slide decks and PR, and it made her just feel very negative about the whole thing. Oh my gosh, sorry. So she wound up saying to me one day, what I really want to do is I really want to start an interior design business. And I said, okay. I said, what are the things that you need to do? And she started listing all these things. And I said, okay. And how do you feel when you do those things? And she said, I love it. It energizes me. It makes me so happy to put together rooms and to come up with all these things. And just the idea of putting together a business and coming up with my brand colors and making my logo and doing all this makes me so happy and energized. It excites me. So I said, okay, what if your reward to yourself at the end of the day, when you have to do these slide decks, when you have to write these publicity notices, when you have to do all of this stuff, your gift to yourself at the end of the day is that you get to sit down and work on building the interior design business, the interior design website, all the stuff that makes you feel excited. And she had never thought about that before. She had not thought about the fact that working on that project could in itself be a form of not only self-care, but a way to balance out that negativity at work. And sure enough, when she started doing that, she actually didn't mind doing the tough stuff at work quite so much. So that's why you need to try to think about where your enthusiasm level is on when you're putting together, your project stack, so to speak. When you're working on things day to day and you're trying to decide what it is that you're going to work on, sure, work needs to be prioritized first. It's the thing that needs to be done. But also, what can you put in there, maybe, that is something that you are enthusiastic about, that's going to balance out that work? So then we talk about tasks and deadlines. And this is the thing that everybody kind of already knows when it comes to prioritization. And that's like, what exactly needs to be done? When does everything need to be done in real life? And then all of that is where we sometimes get a little confused, and it can get a little fuzzy. And that usually has to do with one of two things. Either we are too broad in what it is that we need to do. Like, we'll say, okay, I have this big project that I need to do, and I need to read 32 pages, and that's it. And it's like, okay, but sometimes we need to get more granular than that. What do you need to do on each of those 32 pages? What does that entail? What does I need to read 32 pages mean? Does it mean you just read it? Does it mean that you have to read it and annotate it? Does it mean that you need to read it, annotate it, and attach it to an email and send it to someone else? And I do apologize if this sounds like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I am not an editor. I don't work in the publishing industry, so forgive me. But when you're doing these things, you want to go ahead and you want to try to think of things as granularly as you must to make sure that you are taking into account everything about that task that you need to do. Subtasks is the correct term for that. Or the other thing, what I've run into most often is that when we don't write down these things and think first about actual real life tangible deadlines, we'll go off of how we feel about a task. We'll say, this needs to get done first because it just feels wrong. I'm just tired of seeing this laundry on the floor every day, and so that needs to be done first. And that doesn't always necessarily translate to it needing to be done first. So when we're talking about projects, when we're talking about work projects, life projects, whatever, you generally want to ask yourself, do I need to do this work project right now, today? I don't have the energy, and it's really killing me that I need to do this thing, and I really want to get it done, but it's not due for another 3 weeks, and that's more time than I need. So maybe I don't have to work on that today. Maybe it just is giving me some anxiety. It's making me feel uncomfortable, but I can put it off for one more day if I need to, right? And then I like to use the term task stacking. I don't know if that's the official term, but when you are putting these things together, when you are stacking these projects, I always like to call it task stacking, which is basically where you want to take it, if you can, day by day, really only plan things weekly if it's like a big project where where certain things are happening every day. And you want to start with your non-negotiables, and then you want to add in the things that you really, really, really want to get done that day according to the deadlines and tasks that you've already put together. And then you want to talk about the things that could possibly wait. And that makes it so that you are also managing your time in a way that makes you generally feel very satisfied with what you've done. So here are some important things to take into account when we're talking about this. Be realistic about how many hours there are in a day. I know that we tend to, especially when we get into something real hard, we tend to want to put in 110%, and we hyper focus, and we tend to say, I'm going to spend all 8 hours on this one thing. But keep in mind that you also have to eat, you have to go to the bathroom, you have to sleep, you have to do those things too, and that's also going to take time. So make sure that you're keeping in mind where your energy is, and you want to also take into account where your energy will be and how many hours you genuinely have in a day to get the things done that would make you feel satisfied. To keep it from going over the line, I generally tend to suggest doing no more than 3 work tasks a day, no more than 2 house tasks a day, and to make a point of always at least putting 1 self-care task a day in. And I know that for some people, they hear this and they're like, that sounds like a lot of tasks. Yeah, notice I said for almost everything, I said no more than. Usually if you can do 1 to 2 and leave some room open for a third when it comes to work tasks, or do 1 and leave room open for 2 if you're doing house tasks, that's probably better. You want to leave some wiggle room if you can. The one thing that I try to push people not to wiggle on is that self-care task, because while we've heard self-care to death and we have come to the point where we're probably tired of hearing it, the reason it's being brought up so much is because it is important. If we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not focusing on making sure that we decompress, there's a very good chance that we're going to wind up hitting that wall before we've had a chance to really get to the things that we want to get to. So if you have multiple projects in the chamber, multiple things that you're supposed to be working on, just try to keep in mind that you want to also have that compartmentalization going too, so that you're not just focusing on work, just focusing on house tasks and forgetting about yourself. That is also just as important. And I've already said this a couple times, but I want to make sure that I emphasize this. You will not get everything done every single day. Neurotypical people don't do that. Just make sure that you're putting forth the best energy towards the things you really must do. And must, in this particular situation, doesn't just mean things that work tells you to do. These are also things that, keep you on track with your own personal projects, or help you to feel like you have spent your day well. I always tell people that productivity is not perfection, it's satisfaction. So you're not trying to get everything done at once. You're trying to end your day feeling happy with where you're at. And like I already mentioned, fun projects that really excite you can double as self-care. So don't always feel like self-care has to look like sitting there and staring at a wall for 10 minutes. I mean, if that's what you want, whatever you need, but don't feel like that's what it has to be. And most importantly, it doesn't have to be done at 110%. One thing that I have found is both a point of pride and a point of frustration in being neurodivergent is that when we do things, we really want to do them perfectly. And if it's not done perfectly, we angst over that and we feel like it must not be worth doing, or we're doing something wrong. Truth is, you don't have 110% to give to every single thing. So what you want to do is you want to be okay in some cases with done and not perfect. It's totally and completely okay to say, you know what, I had like my 3 work tasks today, 1 of them went over, I only half finished the second one, I'm going to have to move the 3rd one to tomorrow to make time for the rest of the things I have to do today. Not happy, but that's okay. I'm also not miserable. That's okay. Not happy, but not miserable, still okay. And that a lot of it does not have to be done right now either. Some of it, a lot of it, more of it than we tend to give credit for, can be cut into pieces, can be done in time chunks. There's tons of different ways to still get it done without having to like push through and move through and jump through a bunch of hoops. So give yourself grace as often as you can, because while the outside world will sometimes, the only person who can make sure that they treat you well 100% of the time, or close to 100% of the time, is you. So it's very, very important. And I think that is it here. So I wanted to give some time. Yeah, it looks like we've got a little bit of time for questions. Does anybody have anything?
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you handle all of this when you are dealing with burnout? Like, how do you manage burnout with these techniques?
Oh boy. So admitting it is half the battle, obviously. So I've made a huge effort to make sure that I recognize what burnout looks like for me first. That a lot of us tend to get so wrapped up sometimes in what we're doing every day and what's going on that we don't necessarily recognize that we are burnt out. So that's the first step. But once that's been done, I kind of take that list that I told you, the 3-2-1 list, and I kind of cut it down if I can. I'll say, okay, I'm going to give myself up to 2 work tests. I'm going to do 1 thing at work, and I'm going to give myself 2 self-care tasks if I can. And if I have a chance and I can give myself a day where it is super light, I do that as well. And then, of course, there are other things that people bring up, like, meditating, journaling, yada, yada, yada. If those things work for you, and sometimes they do for me as well, do them. But the whole goal is when you get to that burnout point, you almost want to look at it like it's a pot boiling over. The whole goal is just to stop it from boiling over. That's all you want to do. So once you get to that point, then you can, return to where you are. But up until then, I just try to take what I usually do and scale it back until I feel that I've decompressed enough. Does that make sense? Cool. Do we have any other questions? When energy is so variable, how do you know if you can commit to events? Do you scale back on the days around the commitment? That's an amazing question. So my energy is super variable. Okay. It's been pretty steady lately, but I actually have quite a few times where it's just like, I'm great today, I'm not the next day. And when you have events, that kind of goes back to the idea that you have to control what you can control, right? Like, for example, let's use this event, right? I committed to this event and I'm feeling fine today, but say that I was feeling horrible, or I knew that I was going to be kind of tired ahead of time. Like if I looked at my cycle and realized I was going to be tired ahead of time, I can't control this event. I can't control that I have to be here. So instead, I'm going to commit to using my time surrounding this event in a way that's going to use up the least energy possible. So I'm going to make sure that I get some rest if I can beforehand. I'm going to allow myself to rest afterwards. I'm going to make sure, I do just want to say that, like, as much as I hate this, because I've lately become very obsessed with like this certain brand down here that we have of sour cream and onion potato chips, and that is what I would like to do. I have found that I feel a lot better when I eat a protein bar and drink some water. So I'm going to do that so that I can allow myself to have a little bit more energy beforehand. That's in this kind of situation. If you're just talking about every day, like I just know that my energy changes, then it's best to assess day by day. To just ask yourself, when you sit down in the morning, try to start a routine if you can. When you sit down in the morning and you say, how am I feeling today? Am I feeling like I can handle that 3-2-1 schedule? Or can I only handle maybe one really important thing today and the rest of it's going to have to be busy work? And then plan according to yourself. And just try to make sure that you're keeping in mind what needs to be done so that those can be the things that you give your energy to when you don't have much. And then, leave the rest of it open for when you have more energy to use. I hope that answers that question. With the PMDD ADHD combo, I find that when I'm patient with myself about taking days off, I can hop to a completely different task when I'm back on. Okay, I think I understand this question. So, and I get it. It's like, you know what, I take a day off and then I come back and I don't even go back to the thing that I want to go back to. And there's a couple things at play there I have found. The first being that sometimes that burnout is actually not due to a lessening of energy, less necessarily. It's your brain trying to tell you it's bored with what you're working on. So when that happens, I am a real fan of the ICNU acronym. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but it stands for interest, challenge, novelty or newness, and urgency. So essentially when we get bored, because we are missing at least one of those 4 things. So what I tend to say in that situation, if it's something that I can't use urgency for, right? Because sometimes usually we have deadlines that make us come back to that thing. But if that's not in the cards, then I try to say, okay, well, how can I make this more interesting to myself? How can I make this more challenging? It's kind of hard to add novelty, but how can I make this new? Try to think of a way to pull yourself back to it, to make it more interesting to yourself so that you want to come back to it. And sometimes, depending on what it is okay to just take like a little break and maybe set yourself a day. Say, you know what? I'm going to give myself 48 hours away from this thing, and then I will come back. So it just kind of depends on what the task is for you. Yeah, sorry, ICNU, if that helps. Interest, challenge, novelty, and urgency. Yep, perfect. Thank you, Marnie. And big fan of knowing the highest priority work first, since my energy levels can be way predictable. Okay, cool. Exactly, Shannon. Thank you. Sorry about that, Elizabeth. Yeah, I hope that helped you get it. Sometimes I do talk a little fast, my bad. But yeah, so that is one of those things that I have found that generally helps if I am finding that I cannot come back to something. I have to try to either push myself if it's something that I have to do by finding a way to satisfy one of those things in that acronym, or I'll generally just go ahead and give myself that extra time so that until my brain feels ready to focus. It just depends on what that task is. So I think we are a couple minutes over, but I wanted to make sure everybody's taken care of. You can also, let's see. Oh, we do. Okay, cool. The amount of creativity it can take to maintain novelty can be exhausting. To pre-prepare, yeah, I don't generally suggest that people use novelty. I don't, because novelty, it's hard to make something new. Especially if it's something that you've been doing for a really long time, using novelty is hard. Sometimes you can do it by, if you've got a specific kind of software, sometimes you can change up the colors that you use or the way that you present it to yourself. There are a few ways to do that. And actually, and I apologize if I say your name wrong, I'm so sorry, Diani, I think, actually put it in a very good way as well. Novelty can be your environment. And I was going to actually mention that. If you work on a laptop and you can move, sometimes just moving to a new space can help, especially if you're in an area that does not get a lot of sun. Sometimes you're going to have to try to move closer to a window if you can, or just moving around and keeping your body moving can help. But generally, novelty, I am going to say, is an exhausting thing to try to figure out. And so usually I try to go for the other three first, and novelty is something I go for if that is really, really what we need. Excuse me. Two editing, I like that. For the novelty piece, I try to keep two editing projects going at once so that I can just switch to the other if I'm losing steam. I love that. That's an awesome, awesome idea. Yeah, you can, I know some people who do this, who are writers, who decide that they're going to have one kind of manuscript, and then they have another manuscript that they're working on. And generally they have this one that is like, this is the manuscript I'm going to sell, right? And then they have one that they're like, I'm just writing this just to be stupid, just for fun. And doing that tends to satisfy both parts of their brains, I've noticed, and it makes it so that they stick with things a lot easier. So yeah, that's an awesome idea. So people here are calling out my mention of the sun. We have some people who are not fans of sun, and that is fair. You don't necessarily need sun, but you just want to make sure that you are moving. If you can move from room to room, that definitely helps the novelty aspect a little bit. Just to, let me see. I'm also thinking about how with ADHD routines work as long as they feel new, but once they become routine, ironically, they stop working. Yes. And the way that you kind of have to work around that is, well, there's a couple things. The first thing being that you kind of have to redefine what a routine is for someone with ADHD. A lot of people tend to think, well, routine means that I do this every single day without fail and I never miss. That's not going to happen for us. That's not how our brains work. So instead, what I have started telling people a routine is for us, a routine is something that you do regularly enough that when you don't do it, you miss it. And you tend to be able to go back to it after a couple of days. And that can be something that, it could be anything, really. That could be hygiene, that could be working out, could be whatever. But it is not necessarily something you're going to do perfectly every single day. And if you find that you're having a really hard time sticking with a routine, like you've started a new routine, it's great for 2 weeks and then you stop. One other thing that I have noticed we tend to do, it goes right back to that 110% thing. When you are starting a new routine, don't jump in both feet. And what I mean by that is, say, for example, you're like, I want to start reading an hour a day. I don't do that. I love reading. I want to read an hour a day. That sounds great. That's amazing. I love that idea. But if you are not used to reading an hour a day, our brains take a little bit to adapt to change. So if you just expect that you're going to be able to sit on a couch, read for an hour, and you're going to be able to do it every day and your brain's never going to like have a problem with that, that's just not realistic. So instead, what you want to do is you want to start small. And in some ways, smaller than even sounds reasonable because you know you could beat that, right? I want to read exactly something. I break it down to 10 or 15-minute sessions multiple times a day. I don't know if you're talking to me, Shannon, but that's exactly what I'm getting at, is you want to start with something tiny. Even if you're like, I could definitely read 15 minutes. That's easy. Great. Stick with that 15 minutes every day. And then if you're able to get to that, up it to 20 or 25. But you don't want to jump straight into trying to do whatever it is every single day, because if your brain hasn't had a chance to adapt to it, it will fall off once that newness falls off. You have to kind of give yourself a chance to adjust. And I'm not saying that that's the reason every single time, but I have found that that happens a lot. It even happened with me. I was like, I'm going to work out every day. And then I tried to work out 7 days a week and I made it 1 week at 7 days a week. And then I was like, this kind of sucks. I don't want to do this. So the way that I have found that works best is to do it, I started at 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then when I was able to stick to that, then I did 4. And I had a hard time at 4, so I was at 4 for a while. And then once I was able to do 4, no problem, then I upped it to 5. So sometimes too, routines, the problems that we could have with routine could also have something to do with how quickly we decided to jump into that entire routine instead of building it step by step. So hopefully maybe that also helps a little bit. I don't know if it does or not. So we have 6 minutes left. Did I answer everyone's questions? I'm scrolling through to make sure I didn't miss anything, but if anybody has anything new, I really like half-assed is good enough. Actually, I wasn't sure if I was allowed to swear, so I was behaving, but I like to say better half-assed. Oh, thank God. I wish I had asked ahead of time. Yeah, I like to say better half-assed than no-assed is my way of looking at it. So I tell people that all the time. Let me see. Okay. I love that. I love that. Yeah, it looks like everybody kind of got their questions answered. I do see some people talking about how hard it is to be kind to themselves. And if I may just also put myself out there for you guys and tell you, it's also really hard for me sometimes. And I don't think it's something that many of us are very good at. But if you have to, sometimes it's really hard for us to look at it in terms of doing it for us, right? It's really hard for us to be like, well, I have to be kind for me. Look at it like you're doing a favor for other people then. We really like people pleasing. So maybe we use it for that. We say, if I'm not being kind to myself, then I'm not being kind to the people around me. It's very, very important that you do that though. Okay, so Sonia in the last few minutes we have here, I just wanted to talk about this last thing. Hard when I set what I think is a modest goal and still don't have the energy for it. And I totally get that. I do. And I have had days like that. And all I can say is that in those situations, it does, and I've realized this with my own ADHD as well, with my own PMDD, with numerous things, that it doesn't help us to hate on ourselves for those kinds of things. It's easy to do, but it doesn't help. Our body is the body we have, and our brains are the brains we have. And if you don't have the energy to do that modest goal, then, you know, you just don't have the energy to do that modest goal. And maybe that goal needs to be dropped a little bit. It's not, we make the mistake, I've noticed, of ascribing morality to productivity. I took a nap. I'm a bad person. I didn't get this done. I suck. I don't have the energy to do this thing. Therefore, I am not as good as that person who has the energy to do those things. And it takes a lot of unlearning, and it's not something that we can do right now. But a very good goal that doesn't take, you know, a lot of physical energy is to try to work towards removing that morality. Because there's nothing immoral or moral about taking a nap. There's nothing immoral or moral about not having the energy to do something that you set out to do. It does not make you a bad person or a good person that you set a goal and it turned out that it was too hard for you. It's frustrating, but it doesn't play into who you are as a person, or whether or not you are a worthy person, or whether or not you are a cool person or a good person. So removing that does start to help a little bit with the understanding that this is just a thing that's happening. I have to work with this thing that's happening. I may not like it, but it doesn't make me any less worthy than the people around me. And again, I want to make it clear, not saying it's easy. It's not. I'm still kind of unlearning things, and I've been working on this for a few years now. But that honestly is such a huge part of being able to move through those things. So I feel you, and I really hope that, you know, maybe this helps a little bit, and that you could see that it's doable to get to a point where you're satisfied. It just takes a little bit of that mental change. And naps are the best, I agree. Okay, we only have 1 minute left. So I hate to say goodbye because we're having such an amazing conversation, but I just wanted to thank you guys for being here, for listening to me. I am, you know, my door is always open. I am going to drop my email here, and E also has it if you guys wind up needing to get a hold of me. And I'm always happy to answer any questions I can. You know, we're all in this together. So thanks for being here. She can, okay, this is great. I'm just reading all of these and it's going so fast. Yeah, Ellis can hurl you at my inbox. I don't know how I feel about that.